Boa tarde a todos, bem-vindos. Nós vamos iniciar em instantes. Boa tarde a todos, bem-vindos ao webinar Emi, o que é e por onde começar. Eu sou Priscila Pacheco, trabalho na Superintendência de Relações Internacionais da Universidade Federal Fluminense e hoje tenho o prazer de conduzir essa conferência sobre uma metodologia tão importante para promover a internacionalização do ensino superior, que é o uso do inglês como meio de instrução. Esse evento é organizado pela Universidade Federal Fluminense em parceria com a Embaixada dos Estados Unidos no Brasil, por meio de seu escritório regional de ensino de língua inglesa e do Consulado dos Estados Unidos no Rio de Janeiro. O objetivo dessa conferência é apresentar o conceito de English as a Medium of Instruction, conhecido como EMI, e mostrar os caminhos do início dessa prática de ministrar aulas utilizando o inglês, considerando os mais diversos níveis de proficiência no idioma, seja dos docentes, seja dos alunos, e também considerando as mais diversas áreas do conhecimento. Como nossa palestrante é uma americana, professora da University of Pennsylvania, a conferência ocorrerá integralmente em inglês, com duração aproximada de 45 minutos para a exposição. Após esse tempo, teremos em torno de 20 minutos para responder as perguntas dos participantes. As perguntas podem ser feitas durante toda a apresentação por meio do chat do YouTube, que está à direita da tela. Nós as selecionaremos para que, ao final, elas sejam respondidas. Pedimos a gentileza de que elaborem as perguntas já em inglês para que possamos evitar qualquer tipo de confusão nas traduções entre português e inglês. Para dar início a esse webinário, convido para abrir o nosso evento a Information Officer, a dita de imprensa do Consulado Geral dos Estados Unidos no Rio de Janeiro, Gledisa Sancheco. Gledisa fará sua apresentação em inglês. Good afternoon, Gledisa.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. My name is Gledisa Sanjaco, and I am the Ajiza de Imprensa here at the U.S. Consulate in Rio de Janeiro. It's been about a month since I arrived, and I'm loving the city. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all today. Thank you for inviting me into this virtual space of professors and teachers from various universities and colleges here in Rio. We at the Consulate deeply value our partnership between the Embassy's Regional English Language Office, Universidade Federal Fluminense, and HEARI, in this innovative program that you guys are participating in called the Virtual English Language Specialist. We're very grateful to also have Dr. Catherine Box today. I'm sure you will reap the benefits of this webinar. The United States Mission in Brazil understands the importance that internationalization has for many local institutions of higher education. Whether we talk about incoming foreign students and researchers, outgoing Brazilian students and researchers, university agreements and partnerships, mastering the English language will always be an important step for success. If you can teach a course in English, you are not only attracting foreign students to your institution, but also helping Brazilian students prepare themselves for studying abroad. English plays an important role in exchanges, and ultimately, from a diplomacy standpoint, it establishes a strong foundation for bilateral relationships. I hope that today's session inspires and motivates you to get involved in this exciting process. Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much for your words, Ledisa. Muito obrigada. Agora, na sequência, convido a professora Lívia Reis, superintendente de Relações Internacionais da UF, para também proferir algumas palavras iniciais. Boa tarde, Lívia.
Boa tarde. I will speak in Portuguese and then a few words in English, because most of our audience is Brazilians. But first of all, I say in English, thank you very much for the American Embassy in Brasilia, especially to the American Consulate in Rio de Janeiro, because they are absolutely the providers of this webinar. Our conversation with Leila and the people from the consulate in Rio was very, very rich, and we came to have this activity, very important activity. I'm not talking about, I said I was speaking Portuguese and I'm speaking in English, so I will change to Portuguese. É muito importante esse tipo de ajuda, de colaboração, na verdade, entre as universidades e a Embaixada Americana, por estar proporcionando essa tarde que a gente vai ter hoje e outras que a gente espera que consigamos ter no futuro. Esse evento vem sendo trabalhado há meses junto com o Consulado do Rio de Janeiro e, na verdade, não é apenas a Universidade Federal Fluminense. Estamos aqui com professores e colegas de todas as universidades do Rio de Janeiro, porque esse evento é uma co-organização da UF com a HEARI, que é a Rede de Relações Internacionais das Universidades do Rio de Janeiro. Então, não é apenas UF o que está acontecendo hoje. É um importante evento para a HEARI. Desde que nós nos separamos, em função da pandemia, a gente não pode se encontrar, então estamos tentando desenvolver a velha frase, né? Estamos nos reinventando a cada dia. E EMI é um ponto crucial em todo o processo de internacionalização em casa. Então, eu tenho que agradecer a presença de todos que aqui estão, agradecer muitíssimo a Leila, ao Consulado no Rio de Janeiro e à Embaixada, and thank you very much, very, very much to Catherine Fox to be here tonight, this afternoon with us. Thank you, Priscila.
Obrigada, Lívia. Agora, efetivamente, apresentarei a nossa conferencista de hoje. Nossa convidada é a professora Catherine de Felice Box. Ela possui mais de 20 anos de experiência na preparação de professores de nível médio e superior para trabalhar com alunos multilingües, usando o inglês como língua de ensino. Sua pesquisa está centrada na comunicação professor-aluno em salas de aula multilingües, bem como no processo de tutoria de professores para aqueles que planejam trabalhar em escolas e universidades linguisticamente diversas. O trabalho da professora Catherine aparece em muitos periódicos revisados por pares e ela tem participado regularmente de projetos financiados por subvenções para colaborar com professores em escolas linguísticas e culturalmente diversas. Catherine possui mestrado e doutorado em educação na área de linguística aplicada pela Columbia University e atualmente é professora de prática educacional na University of Pennsylvania, na Graduate School of Education, na Escola de Pós-Graduação em Educação. Catherine, I have just introduced you to our participants.
Yes.
Thank you for being with us this afternoon. Thank you also for accepting so kindly to lead this conference. The stage is yours.
Obrigada, thank you so much. And before I begin, I just want to thank the wonderful people I've been working with so far. The EL Specialist Program for inviting me, giving me the honor really to be a part of this really exciting project, to all the wonderful people at the consulate in Rio de Janeiro, and UFI, the team at UFI has been just so welcoming and wonderful. My only regret is that I can't be with you all in person. Back in the days when we used to talk with each other face to face, but we'll make the best of our virtual time together here today. So I'm going to share my presentation. I believe I can do this. Oops. All right. I don't see my presentation here at the moment, but here we are. Wonderful. Okay. So first, I just want to begin by giving the title of my talk. We're going to be looking at EMI, as you've already had an introduction from others, and we're going to be looking at it specifically in tertiary or higher education. And today we're going to be really looking at the WH questions that are so familiar to us in English. What is English medium instruction? Why use EMI? And then perhaps most importantly, how do we implement EMI in our classes and in our programs? So as I mentioned, we're going to start with the what. We are going to then look at both the affordances and the challenges that EMI pose in higher education. And then we're going to look at the implementation of EMI at 3 different levels: the program level, the curriculum level, and then finally, my favorite, the classroom level, because that's where I do most of my research and work, is with teachers working directly with students. So to begin, I wanted to just demystify a little bit this acronym that is relatively new in our field. English medium of instruction. Sometimes you'll hear it as English as the medium of instruction or a medium of instruction. And what this is referring to, quite simply, to give it a superficial definition, is the teaching of a course in English at an institution where English is not the dominant language and also not the dominant language of the surrounding community. So certainly this would apply in a Brazilian context. Roy Lister and Ballinger give a more robust definition of both EMI and also content-based instruction in general, which we will talk about in a moment, calling it an instructional approach in which non-linguistic curricular content, and he gives some examples, they give some examples, is taught to students through the medium of a language, in this case English, where they are concurrently learning that language at the same time. So that is a broader definition of all of the different content-based instruction possibilities, of which EMI is the most common in higher education. So I wanted to take a moment to contrast EMI with what most of us probably were trained in when we learned our foreign languages. A traditional foreign language course. So in my case, this would have been French, because I studied French as a secondary and as a university major. And I was trained in the traditional way. Right? My course was given in the language of French, right? So in EFL, a traditional EFL course is in English. The language itself is the content of the course. So most of us remember the years we spent studying a foreign language. We would do things like memorize vocabulary phrases. I remember having to memorize all of the phrases in French that would trigger the use of the subjunctive mood, and I just memorized them. That was the content that I was looking at. I would study things like, how do I form the imperfect tense? And that would be a subject of study. I was assessed on my development, right? And so the exams that I took were specifically about my knowledge of the grammar of the language I was studying. And I was also, as a major in French, began with a beginning class, and I progressed through until I became a literature major. English as a foreign language works much the same way. And this is what most of us have been used to when we are trained to speak a language. EMI gives us something new and exciting. The course would be given in English. However, the English language itself is not the main focus of the course. The main focus will be the subject matter in which the course is being, offered. And really, any content area lends itself to EMI. So it's very popular, for instance, in the science fields, engineering courses, where the students are not being taught English per se, but English is the vehicle through which the content area is being delivered. The students might complete tests in English, but they're not being specifically assessed on their development in the English language. They are being assessed on their content area. In some EMI cases, which we can discuss, they have the choice of taking the test even in their first language, even if the course is being delivered in English. So in some cases, EMI doesn't give any exams at all in English because the focus is the content area. Also, students are usually not organized by proficiency level. So if you adapt EMI into your classroom, you will most likely have varying proficiency levels of English amongst your students. And that is one of the things that we, as teacher trainers, try to work on, is helping students of different language ability be able to access the same content. To understand EMI more deeply, I find it helpful to look at a continuum of possibilities when you're delivering course content. So I look at the research of others who have done similar continuum, but I adapted it for our purposes today. So if we think of the traditional language class that probably most of us are used to on one end of the continuum, and the traditional content class delivered in the case of Brazil, in Portuguese, on the other side of the spectrum, we then have possibilities in the middle. And as you can see, and I think my cursor will show you, here is where we locate EMI. But I would like to take a moment to contrast EMI with another approach that is, in some senses, almost perhaps its sister approach. And if you look at research on EMI, you will almost certainly come across research on what is called CLIL, which is very popular in Europe and has been used for many years. CLIL was the idea that younger students, usually at the primary or secondary level, would have their course content delivered to them in English, in some cases French, depending on the country. But here we're going to look at it in English. And they would be learning their content, such as math, in English. And the teacher had two equal foci. One would be on the learning of math, and the other would be on building their vocabulary and their grammatical abilities in English. And so many of these CLIL courses require extensive training for the content teacher to be able to do content and language equally and integrated at the same time. Another option in CLIL is to have co-teaching, where you have one English teacher and one content teacher. And this is something that has become very popular in Europe, and much research has been done on the affordances, the challenges, and the evolution of CLIL. English medium instruction is really one step closer to the traditional content class. So what really happened was that people really liked this idea of delivering English through a content area, but didn't feel it was so necessary to build the English language ability at the same level of detail as the content. And when you think about it, this makes a lot of sense in tertiary education. For one thing, many of our students are coming to us with already an intermediate or higher proficiency in English. And also, many goals of students and faculty with EMI is not so much that they make specific advancements in English, but that they overall contribute to their fluency development through exposing them to authentic texts and to lectures in English. So the idea of EMI came from CLIL, but has moved closer to the idea that we do not need a separate language learning specialist, or we don't need to train the teacher so deeply in language acquisition, but instead allow our content faculty, our content experts, to have some training in linguistic support, but keeping the focus on the content itself. And this has become a very popular way to approach content-based instruction at the tertiary level. And it is a good choice in areas like Brazil, where we're wanting the students to expand their access to the global community, but they're working to become experts in their content area, and we really want to keep the focus there. So this is why we are going to be looking specifically today at EMI. But it's important to note that its roots were actually in CLIL, and so a lot of the research that we use to make predictions about EMI are coming from the body of research where content and language was integrated, mostly for younger students. So now that we've discussed the definition of EMI and where it fits in content-based instruction, we will then turn to why we would use English as a medium of instruction. And some of this was already discussed in our introductory talks. I was able to look at the literature for Brazil specifically. There's not a lot of work done yet. But you can see the names of some people that are doing important work in English medium instruction, specifically in Brazil, Martinez and Bomval and Somento. Martinez noted that any reference to EMI in Brazil dates back to 2010, which means that we are really at the infant or nascent stage of EMI, which is a very exciting place to be. It's my belief that because this is something that is really only gotten recent attention, Brazil has an opportunity, as Martinez notes, to be a leader in looking at what worked with CLIL in Europe, what are some of the challenges, and how can we take the best of what we know and really adapt it in exciting ways in Brazil. So these 4 reasons that I give are really from the research and from my own thoughts. One, of course, is that it expands the appeal of programs to prospective students, that students that are looking to take part in a more globalized, connected audience might find the idea of taking some or all of their courses in English appealing. There's also been suggestions, particularly in Europe and in America, that English is particularly appealing to students from other parts of the world who might not have the level of, in this case, Portuguese, and so they're looking to take their courses in English. And of course, that is something that might be coming up as Brazil is becoming a really important player in the global marketplace. Heightened student mobility, both at the academic level, in that they can collaborate with other students across the world, as English is often used as the lingua franca, and also expanded professional opportunities for students upon graduation who may wish to work as part of international teams or work abroad, right? Finally, this one came from me actually in speaking to people that have gone through programs like EMI. They told me that they were able to read research that was printed in English more easily when they were taking courses where English was the medium of instruction, that it helped to build their competency in reading and also in speaking, and that gave them increased access both to reading and looking at research, and also to producing research and submitting their research to international publications that might want the submission to be done in English. I know, for example, I also reviewed a grant proposal in Switzerland, and they specifically asked me to write my grant review in English. And I was surprised because I actually would have the ability to write it in French, but they wanted to have it in English so that all of the different members of the team would have equal access to it. And so this kind of English becoming this lingua franca for multicultural, multilingual teams is something that is very appealing for people that are looking to take part in EMI programs. Other reasons to adopt EMI, I would encourage, come from the local communities themselves. So in your programs, in your courses, and in your schools, you may have other reasons to consider EMI that I, as somebody sitting in a very warm home office in Philadelphia, would not know. And so this is an area where I do really encourage self-reflection on the part of the communities interested in saying, what do we hope to get from having EMI as an offering in our program? A few, as we say, caveats or warnings about EMI that we have learned from past experiences, particularly in Europe, where it has been used, and also parts of Asia, where it has been part of the educational context for quite some time. It's important that EMI be additive, not a replacement to what already exists in an institution. EMI is most successful when it contributes to the robustness of a program and doesn't try to cut out something that is already working in this case, Portuguese, right? So we're looking at sustaining all the other languages that are important in higher education in Brazil and really in any country looking to adopt EMI. English should be an additional tool, an important and additional tool, but it should not be a substitution or replacement for other successful programs. I also discourage the idea of having an EMI course as a space where all other languages are forbidden. And I can talk a lot more about that, but I would be speaking all day. In my mind, multilingualism is just a crucial part of identity and growth. And so therefore, while English would be the main language of instruction in an EMI classroom, we certainly would not want to forbid or in any way punish students who need to draw on their other linguistic resources in order to access the content area. Another thing that I think is important is that we want to look at the internationalization as an inclusive EMI experience, that we don't see it simply about only sending students abroad or bringing in students from abroad, but rather seeing it as the students having the opportunities to become part of an international community, whether or not they have intentions to leave their local community. And certainly in this world that we're living in now, where everything is connected by broadcasting systems and Zoom and all of the other technology that we're looking at, the international community is, right here in my unair-conditioned home office in July in Philadelphia. And, these opportunities for us to participate in the international community aren't just about us leaving our home, but also about us strengthening our home and expanding our communication repertoire so that we can participate in wide communities even when we are in our homes. Another really important point in my mind is that EMI should not cause division in a program. So EMI is one tool to expand university offerings. And this has come from interviews from places that I've read about where EMI has not been as successful. There have been sort of separations and hierarchies, whether intended or not, where one program was considered better than another, right? So the English version of any course offering, if it's being offered in both English and Portuguese, should not be compared against it as either better or worse than what's being offered in Portuguese. Instead, they should be considered complementary, right? And choices that students have that have equal merit. There is equal merit in building your competency in English and retaining and building your content expertise in all of the languages that are part of your communicative repertoire. And I think that, again, the most successful programs are ones where EMI is additive and contributes to cohesion in the program rather than any sort of hierarchy or division of the program. Okay, now we get to, as I had mentioned, my favorite part. It's great that we defined EMI and we talked about the affordances and possible challenges in implementing EMI. But now we get to the how do I implement EMI in the classroom? And there are two ways that it can be implemented, shown here by two arrows. One is going from the top down, where it's decided at the policy level, and then implementation is put at the level of the classroom or the particular program or department. And the other way, my preferred way, is when it comes from the bottom up, when there's a designated need on the part of the institution that believes that EMI would be beneficial for specific reasons. And those reasons are thought through carefully, and EMI is sort of implemented as an initiative of the local people who are in consultation with those who are teaching the classes. And so we are going to focus more on what we do as faculty members or as teachers who wish to implement English, not in response to a mandate or a policy, but rather as a response to expressed need on the parts of our students and perhaps our colleagues. So I am taking the bottom up and looking at it. I put here a graphic denoting 3 concentric circles. There's the program level, there's the curriculum level, and then there's actually the implementation in the day-to-day classroom. And that's really where most of the EMI work happens. So first, any decision to implement EMI needs to take into consideration the needs of the students. What purpose do you think the students need English for? Is it because you want them to be able to read scientific research? Is it because you want them to be able to engage in conversational discussions because perhaps they'll be part of an international team where they'll need to be able to have conversational English? Do they need specific professional development for an internship? Right? There's lots of different reasons why students may need English, and the way the EMI curriculum is going to be planned should be tailored to those needs. So for example, I have a friend of mine who completed an EMI program in Belgium, and he said that his lectures were actually conducted in Dutch, but that the readings were in English because they were trying to improve their reading proficiency, and their writing and essays were expected to be produced in English, but classroom implementation or classroom discussions were done in a mix of English and, he said Dutch, I think he meant actually Flemish. And so there you had a drawing on both languages, Flemish and English, on the oral level. At the reading level and at the writing level, it was in English only. And that was in response to the perceived need of these particular students. Other courses might decide that all of it needs to be in English. And that, of course, would be a reasonable expectation as well, depending on program need. What are the English proficiency levels of the students? Most of the time, we have a mix of proficiency levels. But it's important to note that students do not need to have advanced proficiency to access EMI courses. It would be on the professor to be able to provide some supports, or perhaps at the university level to provide some supports for students who might be of a lower level of English to help them access the course content. But English proficiency alone is usually not a way that we track out students in EMI. Speaking of resources, my third bullet point, what resources can the students use? So what is available at your university? What is feasible for your university? Would there possibly be supplementary tutoring to focus specifically on English terms? Are there reference materials that are easily accessible? Are there reference materials outside of a Google search, but things that they can access through a virtual library that will help them support their content learning in English, right? So looking at what is already available to help your students and what is feasible to be able to incorporate into your program to support students. Another one, of course, would be considering the program needs for faculty, right? So just like we want to know, why do the students want to learn English? Why does the professor or the program want to implement English? The most important note here, I believe, is that there has been some misconceptions that professors need to have native or near native English speaking ability to successfully implement EMI. The most important criteria is your content area expertise, because if you remember, on that continuum, EMI is much closer to a content class than it is to a language class. And in fact, non-native speakers of English who have themselves studied and learned English in their content area are often in a particularly advantageous position to support students who are facing similar exciting challenges. Whereas a native English speaker doesn't have as much insider knowledge of what a Portuguese speaker might struggle with when trying to read an English text. Those who have learned and are building their proficiency are often a great support and inspiration for their students. The other most important point is knowledge of the kinds of supports you can give as an EMI instructor. Content area expertise and knowledge of EMI pedagogy are the two most important aspects of an EMI instructor. What resources are available? Is there mentoring, for instance? Do professors have opportunities to observe others who are adopting EMI? These kinds of things can be decided also at a program level to support faculty who want to offer this kind of experience for their students. Moving to the second circle, which is the course curriculum. There are some things to consider when you decide you want to implement EMI and you're planning out your course. Again, we want to be clear that EMI does not require that English and only English be used in the class. As the professor or as the course instructor, the theory and the approach of EMI itself is quite flexible in giving faculty the chance to consider when English is going to be used. Will it be used for lectures and readings? Usually it is. However, there may be some changes depending on particular course goals. Class discussions, will they be conducted in English? Will there be a mix of English and Portuguese? Small group discussions. Are you going to allow time for your students to possibly brainstorm in Portuguese before they need to collaborate together as a whole class or in a more formal assessment in English? What are your requirements for written work? Are you going to give students choices on which language they choose to work in? And then finally, will assessments be completed in English? And as the research has suggested, sometimes courses require assessments in English, but some have not. Some have allowed for students to either choose which language they would like to complete their exam in, or the professor makes the decision that certain of the exams or certain of the papers are going to be completed in English and others in Portuguese. So there's a lot of flexibility in EMI compared to a traditional English class where most of the time we do not allow use of other languages in the classroom. Finally, we get to, again, my favorite part, which I save for last. That is your specific classroom supports. So what I would like to do today is introduce to you 4 different things that you can do in your classroom if you choose to implement EMI. Clearly, there's a lot more that I could present today, but for the purposes of time, we'll go through just 4 for today, and then that will give us plenty of time to discuss the different things that I have presented. So the overall goal in your classroom is going to be to provide opportunities for your students to engage with English. They're going to listen to English, they're going to read it, probably going to write it, and going to use it to discuss with others in different ways, depending on the kind of course that you designed based on the needs of your students. The job of the professor will be to provide enough structured support to help students develop proficiency. As we mentioned in the beginning of the talk, there isn't usually any formal assessment of language level, and there's no formal expectation that the students will move from, for example, a B2 on the CFER scale to a B3 on the CFER scale, which is one of the standardized assessments of language development. There usually is not a formalized expectation. However, there's usually a general sense that we are engaging our students with English in meaningful ways so that they can develop their English proficiency more generally. And in order to do that, we need to provide enough structured support to help students. So simply starting to conduct your course in English and assign readings in English, while it will certainly immerse your students in the language, oftentimes does not give them enough structure to make the most out of the materials and the lectures and their own work. So what we like to do is train EMI teachers in giving specific supports to their students so that the work of EMI is easier for the students and that they can really concentrate on their content area. So today, as I said, I'm going to give you 4 supports for the classroom. Some of them are insights from theory, and some of them are just my experience as a teacher working with many international students who come to the University of Pennsylvania and have varying English levels. Now, my class is not exactly an EMI classroom because English is the dominant language of the community outside of the classroom. However, most of the students that I work with are not native English speakers. So I've learned some tricks along the way that I'm also happy to share. So some of these come from language acquisition theory, and some of them just come from Catherine's classroom, to be honest. This one is actually one that comes from Catherine's classroom. I have found it extremely helpful to provide a specific agenda for my students at the beginning of class. One thing I remember from learning a foreign language myself is that I had a lot of trouble following topic changes. I was pretty good when I studied in France at vocabulary, and my grammar was probably at the advanced level, but I really struggled when I sat in a classroom with following what the professor was saying, because the professor would get up and just start speaking, and one topic would naturally flow into another. For somebody who is a native speaker of a language, that's no problem. We have enough competency that we can follow subject changes all of the time. It's very difficult to do that in your second language. So you might be talking about something, like what is EMI? And then all of a sudden I start talking about strategies and you think, wait, how did we get here? Wait, now we're talking about something different. I don't quite follow. Providing an agenda at the beginning of class gives students almost like a direction map that shows them, here's the route that we're going to be taking today. And you can follow along so that when you change topics, you've already been primed to expect that when you saw the agenda for the class. So you'll notice, for instance, that I actually did that today. I modeled it for you all, that I gave you an agenda. And I tried as best as I could when I went from what is EMI to why EMI to actually explicitly state, we've just talked about the different definitions. Now let's look at why we should implement EMI. So I tried to model the idea of explicitly giving my audience signposts so that they could actually see, okay, here's where we are now. And now I'm cognitively primed to hear what I know is coming next. There is a theory that states that this will help students discourse competence, which is one of the competencies that somebody builds as they are building competency in a second language. It refers to the ability for students to both follow and produce long stretches of talk. If you have a high discourse competence, you are able to manage topic changes and shifts quite easily. Most of our students will have a lower level of discourse competence, so we can support them by giving them an agenda and by explicitly stating when we're going to change the subject. I have found this extremely helpful in my classrooms. Another one, and this one is really found a lot in the research, is the importance of what we call multimodality. Multimodality is the idea of providing students with the same language but in different ways. So if I am going to be lecturing about two different approaches to EMI, top down and bottom up, I can try to visually represent that. And I was fortunate enough that I could do that right in my smart art in Microsoft Word. But in some cases, particularly scientific concepts, putting things into graphs so that students are hearing the information, but also seeing a visual representation of that, either in graph form or in illustration form, can be very helpful. I have an example here. One of the things that I did before I became a professor is I taught high school, and I actually did not have students learning English at the time. I had all native English speakers, but when we would read a short passage from Geoffrey Chaucer, who is a medieval writer, the language was extraordinarily difficult, especially because it was written in medieval English. And I found that just providing pictures for them was really helpful. So illustrations can be helpful, and then of course graphs and other visual representations to give students alternate forms of making sense of what they're hearing can really help to enrich their strategic competence in a language. Being able to make sense of what I'm hearing is my strategic competence, and that can be enhanced when I'm given multiple modes of information. Visual is the most common, but also there can at times be things like gesture and movement to demonstrate concepts, or modeling, where perhaps you're going to actually demonstrate something, for the students and allow them to see in real time something while you're narrating. So this kind of multimodal input is extraordinarily helpful for students as well. A third one comes from research that was done many, many years ago, not specific to EMI. It really was just for general pedagogy. And those of us that have been working in this field for a long time have found stopping and pausing to be worth more than 1,000 words. And so I'm calling this wait time. This is what Deborah Rowe called it in 1986. And it's something that's ostensibly very simple, but quite difficult to do in practice. And myself being an Italian American, we are notoriously talkative. And so finding time to slow down, pause, and give time for my students to absorb what I'm saying, I have found to be a skill that I have to practice constantly. Because my general nature is to speak quickly. I don't like pauses. It's not part of Italian American culture. We're always talking over each other. So to be able to state something and then just wait for 2 or 3 seconds, it feels unbearably long for me. But I found that if I ask students a question and I pause and I wait, after a few seconds, some students will start to volunteer answers. If I had started to, if I'd asked the question and then just gave a short pause and answered my own question right away, those students would not have engaged. And as I said, I am still a work in progress when it comes to wait time because it's not something that's natural for me. So slowing down and giving pauses actually develops students' linguistic competence. Because when you're working in a foreign language, you need time to formulate your thoughts. You need time to process what you're hearing. And so it's really been something that I've tried to do is to consciously tell myself, slow down, stop, and wait. Finally, this one really comes from the research. Abundancy and redundancy, which sounds really great in English because it rhymes. Providing information for students in multiple ways and giving them opportunities to reread concepts, to review concepts, to have them engage often with the vocabulary needed to understand the content. So doing things like emphasizing and repeating key vocabulary, particularly if it's a technical term that might not be familiar to them in English. Writing it down, having them look at it, maybe having them repeat it, and then reviewing it at the next class while you're giving your content review is an important way to really ingrain the students' knowledge of the language as they're trying to learn the content at the same time. So asking a lot of questions, giving students opportunities to produce output in English, I apologize for the missing H in English there, is really helpful to give students the opportunity to work with the language in robust ways and to review those concepts often. And so if you know that there is a key vocabulary term that is important for your particular lecture or lesson, using that word often in its different forms is extremely important to help students better intake what you are providing them. So I wanted to give you some final thoughts before I close out the PowerPoint. This is kind of the major points that I think are takeaways from today. I believe that EMI, when thoughtfully implemented in collaboration with local student and faculty need, provides institutions with one powerful tool to adapt and expand access to a global community. And that global community can be what's happening right in our own homes. The most important part of successful EMI courses is content expertise and knowledge of the pedagogical strategies. So the 4 that I gave you here are really just a beginning of many other things that you can do to implement EMI in your classroom. And then it's my position that the most important thing in EMI implementation is what's happening in your own classrooms and lectures. The policies and the bigger pictures that are put in place are helpful anchors, but the success of an EMI program depends on the teachers and the students themselves. So really working at the interaction level and giving classrooms space to be exciting places to exchange ideas in English is really, in my mind, the most important facet of successful EMI implementation. And I hope that this has provided you with some deeper understanding of what EMI is, as well as some concrete ways that you can support your students who choose to work in courses where EMI is an option. Thank you so much. Obrigada.
Thank you, Dr. Catherine. Your conference was very, very interesting with many points to reflect on. So now let's move to the Q&A session. We have some questions here. Switching to Portuguese a little bit. Algumas pessoas já colocaram as suas perguntas no chat e nós as selecionamos. Então, aqueles que ainda não fizeram suas perguntas e assim o quiserem, fiquem à vontade. Nós seguimos monitorando o chat. Catherine, some people have already posted their questions in the chat during your lecture. So we collected all the questions.
Great.
And the first question is from Professor Michele Vogel. Can students ask questions in Portuguese during the classes or only in English?
Great question. I believe that students absolutely can ask questions in Portuguese. The content is the most important part of EMI. So if they have a question about the content, it is going to be very important that that content is clarified for them. And so asking questions in Portuguese would absolutely be a good opportunity for them to do that. Depending on your goals, you may want to repeat the question back to them in English to give them a little bit more support and say, okay, here was your question in Portuguese. Here's what it would be in English, so that they can hear that and maybe ask them to repeat it back to you to give them an opportunity. But certainly the most important thing is that the content is clarified for them. And if Portuguese is the most immediate resource they have and need at that moment, they should certainly use it. Thank you for that question.
Thank you, Catherine. The other question is from Professor Júlio César de Faria, Alvin. I'm a professor in geochemistry, and I teach chemistry, and I'm trying to give classes in English, but there is a strong resistance. Students are not proficient, and the subject is difficult, chemistry, right? So what do you suggest?
First of all, I want my daughter to come take your course because she's really interested in chemistry. But thank you for your question. I would say that if you really believe that this is a necessary thing for them to take classes in English, you would want to start out slowly. Perhaps you want to use technology to maybe give your lecture in English and then have a Portuguese version of that lecture available asynchronously for them. Maybe you'll want to give the beginning portion of your lecture in English and then switch to Portuguese. Usually when you are scaffolding students into a language, they're usually less resistant to the receptive skills. So listening to English and reading English will usually be easier for them than asking them to speak or write in English. So my suggestion would be to start with ways that they can engage with their receptive skills by reading perhaps, and also giving some of your lecture in English. But I think if you try to do too much too fast, that will demotivate them. So certainly, it sounds like in this classroom, Portuguese is going to have a very important role. And then as time goes on, you can try to bring English more and more into your classroom. That would be my suggestion.
Very good tip. The other question comes from Professor Luis Bowser. I am a researcher at Fiocruz and I would like to teach science in English. How can I get involved with this EMI program?
So, I mean, it would depend on what is being offered for you to get some professional development in EMI. There are often different initiatives. One here with the consulate with adapting EMI instruction. And so really getting some specific pedagogical tools to help you is really the best way to start. And there's lots of also resources available on the internet as well. But I find getting involved in an initiative where EMI is being offered, such as ones that might be offered through the consulate, can be a really helpful thing for you when you want to begin having some knowledge of pedagogy. Because having some knowledge on how to do it really is quite important, I think.
Do we have any more questions? Oh, yes, we do. Is there any kind of training for professors to implement EMI classes? It's a question from Professor Luisa Diaz.
So there are some trainings. I know I do some trainings through the consulate with EMI. And I know that it really is something that's growing in Brazil. It's really still at the beginning stages, which, as I said, can be very exciting, but also, trying to get more support for doing EMI. There are growing but still small number of supports available. So I do training through the consulate as an English language specialist. And so those kinds of programs are done periodically in different countries. And so you would want to look and see what's available in your area.
The next question is from Professor Verlan Neto. I am a professor in anthropology, and I would like to know if EMI can be used with students who have not had any systematic and previous contact with English.
Okay, so I'm assuming that they don't have any systematic contact with English, but they must have at least some level of proficiency in English. If students are true beginners, it will be more difficult to do EMI because EMI is more focused on content. If you're working with beginners, you might find yourself doing more of a CLIL situation where you will need to stop and give some specific instruction so that they can begin to develop the tools. If they have no tools at all because they have very beginning proficiency, you would probably need to do some language instruction just to get them off the ground. So if that was the case, that they're truly beginners, then you would most likely need to do something that's more content and language integrated. If they have some knowledge of the grammar system and vocabulary, and it's really just a matter that they've had long pauses in their study, for instance, or lack of interest, then you can do similarly to what I suggested to somebody else, which is you can start slowly with parts of your lecture being delivered in English, maybe having them, give them an opening question to discuss in English, and then slowly increasing the use of English. So it really depends on whether they're true beginners or whether they're students that have some knowledge but just haven't used it in a while. Thank you. Yeah. Hello, I'm back.
I'm sorry, something happened here.
Yes, I did see Julia's comment here. I always notice how much it helps to know where the class is going. Yes, giving an agenda. As I said, that one really comes from my professional experience. Many of my students speak Mandarin as a first language. And so as they're building their proficiency in English, it's really helpful for me to say, here's what we're doing today. And here's the 3 things we're going to address. That I think there's sort of a priming, a cognitive priming that happens in that situation that lines it up for success.
Do we have any more questions? No? Okay, I just want to point out, Professor Catherine, that we have a lot of congratulations, fascinating, inspiring, excellent lecture. So
thank you.
It was really, really, really good. Just a moment, I will switch to Portuguese again. Então, nós estamos encerrando nesse momento e queremos agradecer a presença e a participação de todos. Vemos aqui muitos representantes de todas as instituições da REAR e outras instituições até de outros estados do país. E é muito gratificante perceber quantos profissionais de educação, né, estão comprometidos em oferecer um ensino de qualidade a seus alunos e interessados em novas possibilidades de internacionalização. Agradecemos também a presença da adida de imprensa do Consulado dos Estados Unidos no Rio de Janeiro, Gledisa Sancheco, a presença da Superintendente de Relações Internacionais da UF, professora Lívia Reis. Agora, mudando para o inglês, switching to English, we would like also to thank Professor Catherine Box for the brilliant conference. Professor Catherine, I am sure that the knowledge gained here is of fundamental importance to broaden the horizons of our Brazilian students and allow Brazilian universities to be increasingly prepared to receive foreign students, in addition to providing a collaborative and multilingual learning environment. So thank you very much. Would you like to say some words?
Just thank you so much to all of you in the content, in the comments. It's a pleasure. As I said, my only regret is I can't see you all in person, but my heart today was in Brazil. Even if I'm sitting here in Philadelphia. So thank you again very much for having me, for hosting me, to the consulate and to UFI. Wonderful start to our journey together. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Obrigada a todos e uma ótima tarde. Good afternoon.